Hey everybody, it's Rory from A&S Gear, and today we're going to learn how to do some general maintenance on your paintball markers. Alright, so today we're going to talk about the trigger spring inside the CS2. We've had a lot of people call and ask about the trigger spring. What is the trigger spring? Sometimes the trigger spring is popped out and they don't know how to put it back in, or it's wobbling on the inside of the CS2. So we're going to look at the trigger spring today. So first thing first, let's get our grips off. We don't need those on there while we're working with this. And then I'm going to remove, or not remove per se, I'm going to move the wire connector that goes from the main board up to the top. And that exposes our trigger spring that sits right in here. Now, for those of you who don't know what the trigger spring is, or what it looks like, or what it does, this is your trigger spring right here. I brought an extra one up so that you could see it. It's right here. On the trigger spring on both sides, right here, and then also on the other side, right there, there's a little lip on both of those sides. Now inside the gun, right here, that's where that spring sits, down inside there. And it sits just like this. I'll see if I can just kind of lay it in there for a second, so you kind of get an idea of how it sits inside there. Oh, it fell out. Like that. Kind of in there like that. And when you pull the trigger back, the trigger pushes against the top of the spring, and this pushes it back forward. So it pushes the trigger back forward. Now, what can happen is where these two little tabs lock under this section of the frame right here, if they slip out, then this is going to flop around on the inside there. So you want to make sure that you have at least one side snapped in. Both sides would be better. This one that I'm looking at right here, this one does not have both sides snapped in. It's just the front one. So this here on this side is locked in underneath the lip, and this one is not on this side. We could push this one back and down and get that one to lock in. I would need something a little bit heavier duty than that pick. I'm just using the flat end of the screwdriver, or this flathead screwdriver, there we go, to get in there. So now that one's under there, and then I'm going to go back and push this one down because I did one and it unsnapped the other side. There we go. Now they're both locked in. And you can actually see, when I'm pushing the trigger, you can see the spring moving back and forth inside there and pushing the trigger back forward. So if you see your little piece inside there is loose or flopping around as the trigger's pushing against it, then you want to just push it back down into the corners, into this corner here. So that corner at the bottom, you can see there's a cutout right there. That's where one little tab goes. And then over here, that's the other little tab. They lock in right down there. That's out of focus. Now, if you wanted to get it out, let's say you wanted to work at it from a different kind of angle, you have to take the gun apart to get to it. You can't undo it and pull it out of this hole right here and like bring it out this way. It does need to come out through the top of the gun. So to do that, we need to pull all our grips off. take our frame away from our body. And then we're going to come up through the top here. So the next one would be our board. Let's take our batteries out. And since we've already disconnected the cable from the main board, you just need to undo these 3 screws right here. Otherwise the board would not come out. If you left it, the gray cable connected, the board would not come out. Or if you somehow got it to come out, something would be broken. Then we can just lift up and pull the board out. All right. Next easiest thing to do would be to remove the trigger. I guess I didn't really need to do it that way. We could have left that top one in and just pull this out. Put this back in just because it doesn't need to come out. Would give you a little bit more space, but it's not space that you need. All right, now from here, we need to disconnect our solenoid, and then we're going to push out the retaining pin that holds our solenoid in place. On one side, you have a small hole, right there, small, big. We want to push the small side, or push from the small side, and pop the big side out. Oh man, that's a stiff one. Really didn't want to come out of there. All right, now that we've poked our, have our pin out, we can push our solenoid up and pull our solenoid out. Just like that. And then that's it. You can see our spring sitting down inside there. You can see it from the front. Possibly if I can move Steve's tag out of the way. You can see it right there. Boing, 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 boing. That's the top part sticking up like that inside there. All right, so to get it out from here, you would then just kind of get, I use a pick, you get that underneath there and pop the 2 tabs out, and then this will come out through the top, like that. You could do whatever you need to. Sometimes if you've removed these once or twice, the bend in them will change, and you'll go to put it back in, and it won't be pushing against the trigger anymore. At that point, you want to grab it, gently bend it back into position, or pick up a new one, and then put it back in. You're going to drop it down in there. Make sure both tabs get set inside so that they are, holding in there. We get a better shot of that in there for you. And then go ahead and reinstall it. All right, so let's look at putting all this back together. All right. I'm just going to kind of look around in there to make sure everything looks all right before I start. If you've got your gun all the way apart, you might as well do a little inspection just to make sure everything looks okay. Make sure that spring is springy. I'm going to put the trigger back in. And that way I can really look at it. interacting with the spring. You can see it pushing against the spring right there. We're getting good return on it. We can feel it pushing. It's not just barely touching it. We can see that spring moving back and forth. Let's see where I can find this for you guys here. There we go. All right, let's put it together. Start with our solenoid. Make sure that when you put your solenoid back in, that the rubber gasket that sits down at the bottom hasn't fallen out. It sits, I'll pull the solenoid out. It sits right in there. Sometimes when you pull the solenoid out, the gasket will stay in the solenoid. Sometimes when you pull the solenoid out, the gasket will stay down in the bottom of the frame, down in there. So make sure that it's there, that it hasn't fallen out. Otherwise your gun will leak when you go to put it back together and gas it up. Now we're going to push our solenoid down, and then we are going to push this back through. If we don't push the solenoid down and compress it into that gasket, the pin won't line up. It won't slide through. The hole will be partially blocked by the solenoid body. So we want to push it down so that it goes in, and then push it all the way through. If it doesn't go all the way in, give it another little push, and you want to make sure that that does come all the way out. There we go. Next is our, actually I don't like that. I don't like that at all. It still hasn't come all the way through. I don't have a little plastic mallet up here right now. So what I'm going to try and do is just compress this down a little bit more by hand and get it to go in. I know you guys can't see that. If I use my body for some leverage here, you really can't see that. That's much better. The solenoid was kind of off center just because that pin wasn't going all the way through. Now it's beautiful. Put our gasket that we removed back in. This is our extra one that I brought up from earlier. Now we can put the board back in. There is a little piece of the board that, well, it's actually a piece of the frame that can fall out. This is the little, I guess it's like a window for the diode or the LED that's on here. It's really not a diode. So that when you're doing programming or anything through the USB cable, it shows what's going on the board, it lights up. So we want to make sure we put that back in. It just sits in a little pocket in the frame right there. And then we'll put our board back in. And we'll use our board screws. Snug those all up. Once the board is in, we can go ahead and put our batteries back in. Whenever you're pushing on this or anything like that, make sure that you don't damage these eyes. Your emitter and receiver for your eyes are right here. So when I'm pushing on it, I'm making sure to keep my hand away from those eyes. You really can't see that. With this part of my palm, I don't want to crush these two sensors right here. So be very careful not to push against those as I'm doing it. It's one less thing you might need to replace. plug our board back in. Let's plug our solenoid back in. Make sure our wiring is the right direction. I need smaller fingers. There. And tuck that wire over to the side. There. All right. Good, good, good. Now, pretty much easy sailing from here. Body back on. Another thing we can talk about while I'm putting this back together is I've heard a lot of people, I've had a lot of questions about the gap between the grips in the body and the frame in the body. That's all very normal on this gun. So on the front, when this snaps down, and no matter how hard you push on it, there will always be a tiny little gap between the rubber foregrip and the body right there. You can kind of see the bottom of the eye cover. You can push it up a little bit, but it's really not going to cover it. It's always going to be there, and that's okay. It's not a detriment to the gun in any way. It's not going to affect performance in any way, so it's not a big deal. Same goes for these grips on the back. When we put these ones back on, put this on here, snap that on. If you hold this up and look at it sideways like this, you can see a small gap between the upper part of the rubber grip and the frame. Even to the point where sometimes you can actually look from the side here and you can see a little glimmer of light coming through on the other side. It's normal. They're all like that. I've gotten a lot of calls about that. It's like, oh my God, something's out of tolerance because I can see through it. That's just how they're cut. That's how they are. It's okay. Settle down. That's it. That was mostly, this whole thing was for this spring, because I have a lot of questions about the spring in there. Where is the spring? What is the spring? Do I need the spring? What does it do? And that's it. It's just a small little piece of metal that pushes your trigger back. That's it. Thanks for watching.